All right, hello and good morning, everyone. Crowd of true believers here. I say that because out of all the wonderful talks you could be at today, first talk in the morning to discuss security and compliance at 9 a.m., you're here with us. So I know that it means that much to you as it does to us in terms of trust, compliance, and security. So my name is J.R. Aquino. I lead the security organization for the Dynamics 365 product service group, and this is Nicole Barber.
Nicole Barber. I run the compliance organization for Dynamics 365, so this includes the external, internal audits, and all of the different things that we do on the back end to make sure that the product is running in a manner that you would expect it to.
And so I just wanted to kind of kick things off and set the stage in terms of what we're going to speak today about. The rest of the conference has spent a lot of time talking about the products, talking about the features that you touch directly, and talking about the various different services offered. We're going to do something a little different today. We're actually going to talk about some of the backstage stuff that Nicole and I do to make sure that we have a solid foundation that trust is really built on. And today we're going to give a little overview on the online service itself, just to let folks know what Dynamics 365 is, how it fits into the overall larger Microsoft Cloud picture, and then talk about the various different back-end processes and procedures that we have to make sure that we establish trust and maintain it. So really the first off is talking about the fact that Dynamics 365 mashes up with Office 365 and Azure to provide Microsoft's cloud offering. So we aim to be the solution of services that's complementary to the Office 365 suite. And when you think about Office 365, you're thinking about the productivity used every day at your workstations. Well, Dynamics 365 is the back-end services that allow for some of the stuff that take care of your ERP, your CRM, your receipts from this very talk and this conference when you go home and get reimbursements. And so some of those things that don't necessarily see every person's desktop, the folks they do touch matter a great deal and are the lifeblood of your organization. And putting it into the cloud and taking out of the machines in your data centers or in your server rooms is a really critical and important thing that we take seriously here. So with Dynamics 365, some of the various different aspects of it are helping with the finance and operations, as we talked about for your reimbursements in the ERP side of the house. It also helps with the sales, the marketing, the customer support, and the field services that deliver some of the care and feeding for some of these complex business flows that you have. And so with all these various different activities going on, the importance of making sure that that data is safe and your interactions with those services are secure is paramount to us. We have a large global presence here across the globe, and when we provide you data assurances, we're providing those assurances even in failover mode to make sure that your data stays resident. And so that means when you're dealing with storing your data here in the United States, it's not going somewhere else. Likewise, if you're from a different country, you can rest assured that even in the failover modes, it's staying put. And we're offered in 130 markets across the globe and in 44 different languages. So chances are we have a presence where you are and where you need to be, and we keep it that way even in the BCDR that we have. And so I'd like to really get started and pass off to Nicole, and with that, it's really about the trusted cloud principles that we have that serve as the foundation of trust for the Dynamics 365 suite.
So as I said earlier, my name is Nicole Barber. I run the compliance team for Dynamics 365. I see we have people way down on the end over there. I feel like I'm talking to 6 people here in front of the stage. A short bit of background about the special breed of person it takes to actually run a compliance team. So I'm a recovering auditor. I used to be on the other side of the fence. I jumped the fence and came over to Microsoft to run this team. I have a background in both being a financial auditor and being a systems I specialize in systems and how data transacts through systems, but from an audit and controls perspective. So when we look at what we're doing on the back end from a cloud perspective, I'm looking to make sure that we're doing all of the things that my customers would expect to do if they owned their own servers and running them in their own data center. How do we do it as good or even potentially better than our customers do to provide that value? If you don't trust us, you're not going to put your data in our system. And that's kind of the underlying thing with this entire presentation. We've got pillars that we're built on. We consider them our trust pillars. And these are throughout all of the Microsoft Cloud, not just for Dynamics. Security, compliance, privacy, and transparency and control. And that last one is about making sure that what we do is transparent to you. Bringing it to the forefront, having talks like this where we're not talking about the application itself, but we're talking about what we're doing behind the scenes in order for you to know that what we're doing to your data in the back end. I'm going to lightly touch on each of these topics so you understand what they are, but we're actually going to deep dive into each of them individually. Investing on your security, what you should expect and what we're doing about it. You expect your data to be secure. You expect us to be handling the data correctly in the data centers, to have incident response, to have backup and recovery. We've seen multiple natural disasters. You expect us to be able to be doing those things as well, if not better, with the power of Microsoft to your data in the back end. And JR is really going to go in depth on what we do from a security perspective on this. Compliance, enabling compliance. So this talks about not only putting the regulatory items that you expect for if you're in a regulated industry, if you're in government, if you're in banking, if you're in insurance, you have expectations on you by the groups that you belong to that you have to handle data in a specific way. We do that as well so that you can take dependencies on what we do and lift those up and show them to your regulators and to your auditors, and you don't have to come in and do that. We actually carry that burden. We do the audits on your behalf and then we make them visible to you. We do them regularly. We have continuous monitoring. These are all things that we make available. Data privacy. This is a big one, and I expect to see a lot of questions when we come across the in-depth on the privacy, specifically talking about GDPR in Europe. I do have a couple of slides on it. I will be touching on it, not to an in-depth level, but I will be covering it from a high level just to set expectation with you guys. But more than GDPR and more than Europe, what are we doing to make sure that the data you're putting in our system belongs to you, the customer, and to your customers, and that we're handling it appropriately? We are not going to advertise against it. We are not going to sell it. It is your data. You put it in our system, and we don't touch it beyond that. And the last pillar is going to be transparency, and that is how we're transparent and reportable to you, our customers, on what we do with that data. So that's talking about putting our audits up in a place where you can pull them down at will. It used to be that you'd have to request them. You'd have to come through your sales rep, say, can I have your audit? And then we would turn around and hand it to you a few days later. Now you can go self-serve that on a portal. So what are we making available to you, our customer, to make sure that you understand what we're doing on our side? And even down to the audit results and the evidence requested. And so that you can go through and say, how was your change management? Did your change management pass or fail? How many things failed? We can actually surface all of that now. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to JR, and we're just going to go into each of these topics a bit deeper. I know it's dry. We will try not to be too dry on the security and compliance piece. There's only so far you can go with it, though. But with that, we'll go ahead and do it back to JR.
All right, so let's talk about security. So we start with the idea that becomes code, and we move along to make sure that that code gets in its inception in the physical infrastructure, and then we operate that code, and we provide the compliance certifications and the oversight to ensure that the way that we're running things is the way that we say that it is. And so we'll start off by really kind of talking about how we even before we begin, what are some major principles that we have. And so to start off with delivering a secure, trusted platform, you got to assume breach. This is something that Microsoft is very, very big on. Just like you start in the cloud and you plan for failure, when you're starting with a service, you plan for the breach. If and when it happens, how are you going to be prepared, and what are the various different aspects that you need to be worried about? And so with this, we have active blue team prevention practices as well as red team practices to make sure that we're not just standing around waving our hands and scaring the bears away. We're actually saying, look, let's take a look at the fortifications that we have. Let's validate that the fortifications are working, and let's address, identify and address the gaps in any of those controls. And the partnership between our red and blue teams is really what helps provide that, along with the continuous improvement of our SDL. So our SDL is the security development lifecycle. And this is really about being able, this is a fascinating thing that is great for Microsoft and for the industry. This is a continuous improvement plan that allows for the education of the previous learnings to be passed on each piece of code that gets written in Microsoft. That starts with the education of our developers. So we start off by making sure that the best practices are understood and that the insecure practices are known so that no one has to go and receive the bumps and the bruises of the previous folks. We run those through in our training and in our requirements. When the time comes to do the designs, those designs are done with these assumed breach threats in mind, and the threat models are reviewed along with the static and dynamic analysis that goes into reviewing the source code and the overall design of any service or product that we offer. Prior to release, all of these things are reviewed in a horizontal review for final checks before they go out. And this is some of the stuff that we do for last safety belts before we go into the air. And then, of course, we have our wonderful Microsoft Response Center for MSRC that's there for us and if there's any event that something goes wrong or goes bump in the night. So we talked about the idea. So I have an idea, I want to make some code, and then I want to be able to make sure that when it's stored and when it's running, it's safe. And that starts off at the physical layer. So we have physical security at all of our data centers that is world-class. This includes biometrics, this includes 24/7 security staff, backup power, cameras, alarms, two-factor authentication, and preventative measures for geographical problems such as earthquakes on the seismic side. And so when you put your data in trust with us, we ensure that it is physically safe when it's in our hands. And this is something that we offer to all of our customers and is a value add that would be very hard to match trying to set up your own data center with the amount of quality that is put into the concrete port on all of ours and all of the staff that we use to take care of it. Moving on from the physical, we have the network layer of trust as well. So our DDoS defense system, being out on the internet these days, it's becoming more and more prevalent to be able to see folks being bumped offline because of a distributed denial of service. And all of the services in Microsoft are thankfully protected with a DDoS defense system that allows for the monitoring and the scrubbing of network traffic that's determined to be malicious, regardless of whether or not it originates from outside in the world from the internet, or if somebody's trying to use Azure itself against us, or our own services against us. And so that's a huge peace of mind for availability, because it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability that make up security. We cannot forget the product has to be there to be secured in the first place. And so the DDoS defense system really helps for that when we're bringing in traffic, inspecting it, and then scrubbing it as necessary if anything comes through that is malicious in nature from a DDoS perspective. Once that data is crossing the line or being stored in transit, we have a number of different data protections that we take care of. So the first one is that within Dynamics 365's suite of services, we make sure that there is data segregation. That means when you are putting your data into our servers, you're getting your own dedicated database. This is not a shared database that's distributed amongst other customers where there's chances of cross-contamination or tenant hopping. You get your own database. So starting right off the bat, you have segregation. While the data is on the hard drive, we use MS SQL's transparent data encryption, or TDE, to make sure that we have real-time I/O encryption inside the actual database itself. So if somebody runs off with the hard drive, or somebody steals a VM, or there's some sort of problem at a physical layer while that data is at rest, You have peace of mind that all of those ones and zeros are encrypted, and that's not something that you have to worry about. While the data is in transit, we make sure that all of your connections with Microsoft are encrypted. So whether that's your SDKs, your plugins, your web browsers connecting to Microsoft, we're ensuring that we're using the industry leading encryption on securing those communications. And it doesn't end there. When the web servers are having to deal with the back end, all of those encryptions, all of those transmissions are encrypted, speaking back and forth to the database servers themselves. The threats that Edward Snowden provided visibility in the world were taken very, very seriously, and it is no longer something that folks can feel that it is okay to run around with unencrypted lines inside of the data center. So those preventative mechanisms are in place as well when we're speaking internally to database servers. I talked a little bit about data residency, and so again, this is a commitment that we make to you that when you're using Microsoft Dynamics, we are giving you your data in your locale. When there's a transfer of data, it's between you and the local service, and when there's a failover, we have a redundant data center within that same geography to ensure that we are staying true to the sovereign requirements of that data in that nation. And then again, for redundancy, we have failover in mind. We're putting on a service that's online 24/7, and that means that it needs to be available to you. And so having failover data centers inside of the geo just comes with each stamp every time that we move into a new country. And then for data destruction, if for some reason you choose not to be a customer anymore, that data is destroyed. We do not hold on to your data. Again, as Nicole said, we're not using it to try to advertise to others or perform any activities around it that you didn't give consent to, and that includes holding on to it. And so we have a commitment to you that if you were to leave, that data is destroyed, and when it is no longer needed, that data is destroyed as well. We have some of the industry's leading access control principles in Microsoft, and Dynamics 365 is no different. So many different organizations can give you an online service, but this particular online service has some access principles that we think stand out from the rest and are a differentiating factor. And so starting that is the fact that we actually run our service with 0 persistent administrative access. So what that means is we do not have admins running around that always have the ability to log into a machine just with their username and password. We actually have 0 persistent admins, and we utilize a technology called JIT, or just-in-time access, whereby an admin needing to access a machine to perform an update or other system administration duties must have a valid incident or ticket that explains what they're going to be doing, where they're going to be doing it, and what commands they're going to be issuing. And once that ticket is granted, the access is dynamically given and then taken away after they're done performing that job. And so that's done for peace of mind and for security. That means that when somebody is out in the world, out at Starbucks, checking their email or doing anything else in the world, there's no value in trying to hijack that individual's credentials because they actually don't get them into production unless they go through all of the same channels. The principle of least privilege. So this is really in coupling with the access to customer data. You need to have clear role segregation between the folks who are administering the service and those who are supporting the service and working with you, the customer, on making sure that if you have a problem, the access to the data is available for your troubleshooting and not exposed to the admins on the back end who may need to perform updates or transfers. As I said, those systems are encrypted, and so while the administrator may have access to the physical machine and to the operating system, they don't have direct access to the roles necessary for compromise to your data or for other manipulations at that point. We actually don't want access to your data. We want to make sure that it stays within the controls that you can define, and we work towards those. We also have investments in automated resolutions. So this means that we have partnerships between our DevOps and our site reliability engineers, or SREs. And so this really speaks to the human element, right? The machine will continue to execute the very specific script or the very specific role that it's meant to perform, but human beings are flawed in nature and can have a human error. And so the more touch that you have, the more opportunity there is for a mistake to be made. And we invest heavily in our DevOps and our SRE automation to ensure that if a particular process can be done by the machine, that it is written to do so, so that we can eliminate as much human touch as possible from the environment, and try to make sure that when there's a procedure or a process performed, that it's a known, auditable, and calculated process that gets run through. Another thing that I'm very proud of that we do here in Microsoft is we require a SAW for all of our production access. SAW stands for Secure Admin Workstation. So the machine that I use and my team uses to be able to touch anything in production is a hardened machine where we ourselves don't actually have any administrative rights on it at all. It requires us to have badged two-factor access. I can't log into it with username and password. And it will self-destruct if I leave it at a hotel room or forget it in my car and it gets stolen. These machines are used to help provide additional peace of mind that you don't, while you may have access with the cloud in a mobile world, we have the security in place to make sure that it's coming from a machine that is truly tested end-to-end through the manufacturing process to delivery, to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with and to minimize any sort of compromise that may occur at the OS level. And so that's a unique thing for Microsoft, and you can read some about that on our public blogs when you look up SAW. The other thing that we use is the hardened jump boxes as access points. So even though we have the access to the SAW to be able to manipulate and administer production, the jump box is used to make sure that we have a central ingress point when we're dealing with production. The best way to be able to defend against a wide array of attackers is to force them down a particular channel so that you're able to inspect the various activities and narrow down the suspicious or anomalous activities. And we make sure that that takes place by requiring jump boxes so that even folks who have access as employees internal to different divisions, they would be firewalled off and forced to use the same jump boxes, and allows us to have significantly more control over our back end. Here's an overview of our incident response. So when those days occur where we need to perform investigations or take evasive actions, there's an entire cast and crew and family members that go into making sure that our steps are reproducible, auditable, and ensure that we're doing the best thing forward to detect, remediate, and evict any sort of issues that come around. So at the start of the event, an alarm or a log is triggered, which engages our operations center. We have one of the most world-class operations centers in Microsoft, and it is staffed 24/7 with professionals who are using the highest analytics along with AI and machine learning to be able to take a look at patterns, to be able to correlate across all of the various services in Microsoft, not just the one that you purchased, and use that telemetry to corroborate bad actors across the globe, regardless of whether or not they've targeted you directly, targeted the services that you use, or targeted a sister service. Once the operations center is engaged and they have what they suspect may be an incident, the actual DevOps team that wrote and operate your service are engaged, along with my security team and any other security team member that may be necessary to perform an investigation and a remediation. After the event is confirmed, we move on to notifying customers. So if for some reason there was a full detected data breach, this is something that we take very, very seriously, and we actually have hard set SLAs against to make sure that we notify you in any event that we have detected that there's an issue with data that you've entrusted with us. And so this isn't the case where you see a number of different folks in the news taking seemingly months before they disclose something to you. If there is something that has happened to your data, we are committed to letting you know that something happened and what we are doing about it. And so that way, you can take fast action on your side because you need to take care of your customers as well, And you can only do that as best as you can if you have the most up-to-date information about what's going on and how you can coordinate with Microsoft to eliminate an issue. How do we do all of that? Well, we have a whole family, as I said. So from the intelligent security graph that you may have heard others talk about earlier in this conference, to Azure, to Office 365, and even to the Windows team, there's an entire ecosystem of various different telemetry and various different signal that we use to be able to perform the threat analytics that allow us to take the actions that we need to. And so my security team works in conjunction across the various different security teams in Microsoft to share notes and to share intel and to be able to respond in coordinated ways. And we do that via the Windows Defender alerts that are in every version of Windows 10, along with all of the advanced threat analytics available to the cloud services and the various different PaaS, SaaS, and IaaS services that we utilize. I talked a little bit about the Operations Center. We call it the CDOC, or the Cyber Defense Operations Center. It's very similar to standing in front of the things you see at the movies that show NASA. It's a giant room full of screens and a whole bunch of people monitoring constantly for any sort of telemetry and data that they have. And so again, this is a 24/7 worldwide operation, 365 days out of the year, that are monitoring all the various different members of this family inside of Microsoft, looking for signs of threats or indicators of compromise to be able to coordinate and work through various different investigations and remediations. They serve as our central hub, so when there is an issue that requires folks to be on a bridge, these are the coordinator points that allow us to get together with all the various different subject matter experts across the organization that are necessary. The CDOC is staffed with more than 50 experts. We have folks that are professionals at data sciences. We have folks that are professionals in investigative and forensic security, as well as networking and the various other aspects that go into making sure that we're able to respond effectively and quickly whenever we sense that there's an issue. And again, at the very end of that, we back that by the SDL. So again, any learning that we have in the live site, in the real world, we take that back and we augment and continually improve our secure development lifecycle to make sure that some bump or bruise that another development group experienced doesn't have to be yours. You can learn from that and change and improve the software as it goes along. And then lastly, I want to be able to, I'm very, very excited to actually talk about this one. I think this is probably one of the first times that this has been talked about, but between Azure, Dynamics 365, and Office 365, we have announced that there is a unified cloud pen testing policy for all of you, the customers. Microsoft received considerable amount of interest in customers needing to have additional proof besides compliance certifications and statements saying that you should trust us. And so we have enabled all of you, the customers, to perform your own pen tests. We have a few agreements that you have to be aware of to make sure that we're not putting any other customer at risk. We have agreements to make sure that you're not trying to perform your own little DDoS and cause an outage in the service. But we do want to be able to empower you so that you can take your tool sets and your requirements and get peace of mind and perform a penetration test of our Microsoft services so that you can have the evidence that you need for your auditors, your CISOs, or your own internal documents. And there's a few reasons for that. You're going to want to be able to do that because you need to have additional proof because of your regulators, but you may also need to do that because you've had major customizations. One of the most powerful things about Dynamics 365 is the empowerment of the customer to enhance or extend the functionality of the platform. And when you do that, you may actually introduce your own risks, your own OWASP top 10 problems that previously required quite a lot of hoops to be able to jump through for the permission to be able to pen test it. Now, because of the cloud unified pen testing policy, you are able to do that. You do not have hoops to jump through. You do not have complex forms that you have to fill out. You just have to have oversight on the things that you're performing so that you're not causing a harm to Microsoft or other customers, and that anything that you find, you please let us know so that we can take care of it and remediate those issues. But that is a dialogue and a feedback loop that we commit to you. Again, the other reasons that you might be doing this is because you need to be able to have personalizations tested and be able to provide that audit evidence to your regulators as well. And secure@microsoft.com is the location to be able to share any findings you think you may have, or reproduction steps that you might want to be able to share with us to make sure that we address those. And you'll have peace of mind that you get a ticket number and a feedback loop that allows you to have more direct control over the things that make you concerned that we can address for you. And so with that, I will hand off to Nicole to be able to talk about the various different aspects of compliance that have third parties validate all of the things that we talked about today and provide you with additional peace of mind, certification backed. So thank you.
Thanks, JR. So everything that JR does is in order to protect your data. My job is to make sure he actually does what he's saying he does. I have to come in and look for evidence, test, and make sure that we have a way to prove to you that all of the wonderful things that JR and his team and our SREs do are actually being done and being done consistently throughout the year. Not just for the short period of time we have an auditor in, not just for a window of time that's being audited, but the entire time that we're continuously monitoring it. Basically, nobody likes to see me come in a room. So this is just, again, kind of a brief back on the transparency, the privacy, the compliance, the security, and the business continuity pieces that we have. Basically, we're going to go into each one of these again, but I thought I would just get a reminder back of the pillars that we're going through and the different pieces that we've got. This is an interesting conversation. How many of you in here are on-prem customers or are doing your stuff online? Okay, now how many are online? Okay, as you guys know, and it's actually good to see a mixed bag in here because we have different levels of responsibility depending on how you're hosting your data. Whether you, the customer, is responsible for it, us, Microsoft, is responsible for it, or if it's a hybrid solution. When you're an on-prem customer, you hold complete control and responsibility for your data. So you're in charge of your change process, you're in charge of access to your data, you're responsible for your networking. Short of supplying you something that you've put on your server, we're out of it. When you get into the IaaS and you're using Azure, there are pieces that Microsoft is taking responsibility for. The virtualization, the servers, the storage, and the networking. But everything you've put in on it, you're still taking responsible for. Your changes to the system, you're still responsible for making sure it's actually being patched. We're giving you the hardware, but you have to make sure that all of your networking and pieces and it's configured correctly. That's all still on you, the customer. When you're taking advantage of our platform services, we take a little bit more responsibility and we're doing more on our side, but the customer still has a decent amount of responsibility on what we're doing with the applications and the data. And at last, when you're using our SaaS applications, like we're talking about with Dynamics, or like we're talking about with Office, now Microsoft has taken on a lot more responsibility for this. We're running the application on your behalf. Now all of a sudden, we're controlling change management, we're controlling access management, and that's where the pieces come in of what we have to provide you to show you we're doing it correctly. Now, the customer's never going to be 100% hands-off for responsibility. You guys know this. You control access of your people to this data. I can't take responsibility for that. But I can make sure that anybody on JR's team is accessing it correctly and that we're doing the right things on our side. So it is a tiered system, and depending on what kind of system you're using depends on how much responsibility we take versus how much responsibility is on the customer. So the question was with a third-party app. If you use a third-party app and you're putting it on top of Dynamics, is it our responsibility or yours? That is the customer's responsibility. So it's your due diligence to make sure that you've looked at who's providing this to you, make sure you're comfortable with it, and that you're installing it. Once it's running in our system as far as access and things like that, we'll take it from there. But if you're choosing to install it and choosing to add it on top of your platform, then that's going to be on the customer. Control framework. It's almost like a bad word. Frameworks cause hours and hours and hours of work on people who are locked in dark rooms with high-end degrees, and they don't actually let them out into public. there are so many regulations and audits and things out there that we have to comply with. And if you're in one industry, you can keep it down to just the industry. If you're federal government, if you're Germany, something like that. When you're Dynamics, when you're the Microsoft Cloud, you have to comply with all of them. Because depending on what customer you have, that customer is responsible for their particular industry, but we have to do them across the board. So instead of having, I don't know, 8,000 controls that are different across the different industries, what we've done is we've created a control framework. We've taken all of the plethora of different pieces out there, we've compared and contrasted them to make sure we have coverage, and we've tried to at least make it a manageable set for these guys who run the service. And so we've got, in the dynamic space, we have about 450 individual unique controls that we test and continuously monitor. And that goes everything from automated controls that are part of the system, are ports configured correctly, to is our change management or incident management process working? Are we doing incident management testing so that when something actually does happen, everybody doesn't look at each other and try to figure out, where's the document that tells us what we're going to do? So we've put all of these together, and sometimes they don't actually match up that well. Like, for instance, incident response, depending on who you're talking about, depends on how quickly you have to respond to that to the customer based on the regulation. We always choose the highest bar. That's the only way to do it. And it's not multiple bars. It's not that we go down and go, okay, is this customer going to be a financial customer, or is it going to be a customer who's got HIPAA regulation? Well, okay, do I have to respond to them in 72 hours? Do I have 2 weeks? It's not like that. We choose the highest bar, and it's that way for all of our customers. So we don't have to, it would never work on our end anyway. We'd never be able to figure that part out. So we try to make it a single network or a single framework to go across. We have tooling behind this as well, and that's how we do continuous monitoring. It's internal tooling, but it's tooling where I can find the person who owns that control, who's an engineer, and make them responsible for putting the evidence up against it, making sure that they're doing it on timely, if it's an access review, if it's reviewing a change management process, and we can see that they've done it in the time frame they're supposed to do, and if there were any anomalies in it, that we've gone back and fixed those. I have not put all of our compliance certs up here. Honestly, the slide would be too busy and impossible to talk to. It's a laundry list that we've got, but I've put some of the most common ones up here. From a technical, or in a way you could say a worldwide, we cover the basics. We cover ISO 27001, 27002, 27018, and we cover SOC 1, SOC 2, the CSA Cloud Framework. These are pretty basic and pretty international standards. Verticals, there's a ton. It just depends on what you're in. If you're in healthcare, if you're in government, if you're in HIPAA for the healthcare. Some of these are contractual obligations where there is no actual external audit to perform against them, so we have a contract addendum to be able to put against it. So HIPAA is an example of that. We offer a HIPAA BAA as a contract addendum, but there's no actual audit against it. And on the complete other side, you have FedRAMP, which is for federal government, which is a very in-depth and very, very hard piece to do. We are FedRAMP JAB, which is a Joint Authorized Review Board, reviewed at moderate for Dynamics. There's about a 1,000-page document that goes along with that certification that's available to all our government customers to review. So depending on which piece is in there depends on the level of depth we've had to go to. And then we've got global pieces like EU model clauses, UK G Cloud or Gov Cloud. We've got Singapore MTCS Level 3, which is a banking standard in Singapore, IRAP, which is the Australian government piece, and we've got a New Zealand as well. We've got, like I said, a plethora. If you go to our Trust Center, our public Trust Center page, actually for all of the cloud services, you can go through and see if the specific one you're looking for is covered. We also have some special programs for specific groups of customers. So these customers are highly regulated and might have special requirements outside of just an audit that we perform for them. So to give you an example, I've got two of them I'm going to talk about. One is the FSI, customer compliance. FSI in the banking, they have to report to regulators. Regulators are not comfortable with data going into the cloud, or at least were not for the longest time. Microsoft put an entire program together where we actually went directly to the regulators and explained to them how they could feel comfortable with banking data in the cloud. And then we went to the largest banks that were our partners and had this joint conversation between the banks and the regulators to talk about what we could do to move forward with this. Azure O365 and Dynamics are all part of the FSI customer program. We hold a yearly summit. We give them in-depth looks at our audit reports. There's all sorts of things that we do to support the banking regulation and banking needs. And this is an example of where we've taken a regulated industry that has a lot of very specific needs and created a program around it. And it's tiered. So we do some things for the largest banks, those too big to fail banks, the GSIFI banks as they're called. We do things for them that then trickle down, and the rest of the banks are able to take some learnings and some works over there. So there's a level that all financial customers get. There's the compliance program, and then there's what we do for just the biggest banks in the world. It's a fantastic program. A lot of effort goes into it. There's a lot of employees at Microsoft who are just dedicated to doing nothing but running this program. The other program that I'm going to talk about is our U.S. government. So the U.S. government, like the FSI, has a ton of regulation on it. So depending on if you're going to host U.S. government data, the amount of things that we have to do on the Microsoft side is a laundry list, depending on which level of government data you're storing. So we have breakouts where we actually bring in government representatives. We bring in representatives from the different areas that use our service. We take feedback. We give them in-depth insight into our programs, and basically make them feel comfortable with what we're doing with government data on the back end. In this case, we actually have different sovereign clouds. So we have one for the U.S. government that keeps the U.S. government out of commercial data and keeps commercial data out of the U.S. government data. It keeps most parties happy that way, and it's in North America only. There are requirements on who can access it from Microsoft, not just any, even with the JIT, it's not just anybody can JIT into it. They actually have to have they have to have a citizen residency to be able to get into it. So there's all sorts of access controls on these sovereign clouds. Another sovereign cloud we have is around Germany. And so like the German government has very specific rules about who can access German citizen data. And so we have a lockdown environment in Germany that only German citizens can get into. So I'm going to move on to privacy from compliance, because talking about audit reports really just isn't that exciting. It takes a special breed for sure. I want to talk about GDPR. This has been a hot topic. I know even prior to giving this particular session, I've gotten a lot of offline questions on GDPR. I've been told by a lot of my colleagues they're getting GDPR questions. I will preface this with, I am not a GDPR expert. That's not where my deep dive is. Once that there is an audit or compliance around GDPR where I have to go check boxes and prove to an auditor we're doing GDPR, that will be my wheelhouse. But I figured because it is such a hot topic right now, I was going to cover it from a high level just so we can get some talking points on here. How many of you guys have heard of GDPR? Okay, most of you in the room. So I won't go through and give you the absolute basics, but in general, it is a regulation that becomes active in May of next year that talks about how we handle personal data of European citizens. There is a lot of work that Microsoft is doing on the back end to make sure that Microsoft is compliant with these rules. There's things like being able to delete data when a customer requests it, not just from, say, the Dynamics system. I'm talking about from the entirety of Microsoft. So there's a lot of back end work that we're having to do to make sure that we can be absolutely compliant with everything we're doing. There's an increased duty for protecting the data, so it actually expanded our definition of what individual data was. So we have a data definition catalog just like most of our customers do, and we define what customer data is, what PII is, things along those lines. GDPR has made us expand that definition of personal information. So what could have been an identifier, just a number identifier, so I couldn't tell that you were Bob at Contoso, but I have a GUID that's associated with you. That GUID was never personal data before. Now with GDPR it is. So we've had to expand what our definition of personal data is, and when we talk about how we handle personal data, that has been expanded throughout our system. There are mandatory breach reporting with on personal data, so we've expanded what that definition of personal data is. Now you've got to expand what systems you're looking at and what's reportable on. So we've had to update our policies, procedures, and our ability to report based on that. And then there are significant penalties for non-compliance to this. And I think this is why everybody is so interested in what's going on with this particular piece, because the amount of financial penalties associated with breaching this it's huge, it's massive. nobody wants to be in that, be the first person that they take as an example of putting this together. So that's why everybody's taking this so seriously. Key changes with GDPR, personal privacy controls, so talking about accessing the data. Controls and notifications, notifying when things happen and who you have to notify. Transparent policies, and IT and training. So we've got two goals as part of Dynamics. One is to make sure that we're doing the right things on the back end for any data that we hold, right? Things that are in telemetry, things like that, that wouldn't typically surface from a customer. We need to make sure we have the ability to comply with all those. The other side is making sure that we are enabling our customers to be able to also comply with GDPR. Since we are an end application, for instance, we have to notify our customers in a fast enough manner that they can turn around and notify their customer within the window that's required. So there's two sides to this from a Microsoft perspective, making sure we're doing the right thing on the back end and then making sure we enable our customers to be able to comply with it. So what does this mean for your data? It means that there's stricter control on personal data. It means that that definition of data has expanded. It means there's better data governance. There's better tools for transparency. We've got to make things like audit logging and the ability to see where your data is out there. And there's improved data policies to provide controls for the subjects and make sure that we're processing it in a way that abides by the law. So going through to transparency, this is the trust portal I talked about earlier. So this is where you can go to self-service. Oh, we had a question over here.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
The prior section
Uh-huh.
on GDPR, regarding the details about investments and the steps that you're taking, are there any places that you can go to get those details now or at a later time?
So the question was, based on our investments in GDPR, was there a place that we could, that customers can go to see what those investments are? There are public blogs and there's Microsoft level GDPR guidance on what we're doing on the back end on our Trust Center. Actually, on not only this, if you go to our Trust Center or if you go into the Trust Portal, which is what I've got a screenshot of here, there's white papers and there's information available there. I believe in our resources section in the slide deck, there's some links to it. And I'm happy to connect you to. There's also, and I should have looked them up beforehand, but there's also several sessions specific to GDPR here at the conference that go much, much deeper into how the individual services are dealing with it. And if you want a deeper set of knowledge of what they're doing, like on specific feature sets and things like that, I'd highly suggest you look up some of the GDPR sessions. So the Service Trust Portal, it used to be several years ago when I had joined the team for the first time, there was no way for a customer to pull down an audit report or see what we were doing. So I would get an email saying, customer Contoso's asked for an audit report. I'd have to go pull up the most current audit report. We'd have to find a secure way to mail it or get it to the customer, and then they could review it. We've gotten so far beyond that, and I'm glad because that took up a lot of time. Now it's all self-service. As audit reports become available, they get posted into the customer trust portals. This is available through O365 in your admin center. If you go in, and you can get all of them. So you can get them from Azure, you can get them from O365, and you can get the reports from Dynamics. They are available per industry. So for instance, regular commercial customers aren't going to see the government reports, but if you're a government customer, they'll automatically surface themselves to you. There's white papers, there's security resources on here, there's pen test results on here for customers. So if you don't have the resources or the inclination to run your own pen test, we do pen test and we actually surface those reports at a high level. We do a summary report for the customers. We're obviously not going to put anything out there that could endanger the service from a finding perspective, but we'll do a summary and tell you what areas were found and remediated and the things that we've done. These are all available as a self-service piece for you. There is the session directly after this I will plug for my good friend Ohm. O365 is taking a step further. They are doing amazing things with our control set. So that control set of like 400 controls I told you we have, they're putting that with machine learning and making it available to customers. It's something they announced here at Ignite, and he's going to go into it in depth in the next session. It is a fantastic tool. A customer can actually upload their own control set and compare it against Microsoft's control set and have it come out and see what's covered and what's not, all through machine learning. And this is kind of the direction that we're going with the customer transparency. transparency is very important. Without transparency, there is no way for you to know that you can trust us short of us standing up here and saying, trust us. This is your ability to look in and see what we're doing on our side. And the more we can make transparent to you, not just from a report perspective, but what if I put those reports into a system where you can search them and see not only did the control pass or fail, but what kind of evidence was collected on it. And if it did fail, was it 1 out of 25? Was it 10 out of 25? You can actually dig down into those details and see what we've done, just like you would if you were running the service and testing it on your own. So this is the direction that we're going with transparency. We want to give the customers the control and to be able to see what's going on the back end of the system. It looks like we're going to have a ton of time for Q&A. We went through the security slides, I think, a little bit faster than I had intended. We've got about 20 minutes left. I'm more than happy to sit up here and answer questions. I know we've had a few that come through. But if there's any questions for JR and we're happy to sit and answer them.
You've got folks to be able to talk about what happens backstage, so this is your opportunity to ask some of those questions.
Oh,
there in the back. If you'd like to stand up and ask at the microphone so that we can all hear you, that way we... Sure.
I saw where you had listed about a client, customer, citizen can ask to have their data deleted. What if they're in the criminal justice system applications?
So there is, and keep in mind a lot of this is up to interpretation of the lawyers right now, right? There was a regulation written and there's a bunch of lawyers spending a lot of time going through it and figuring out what it actually means. But it's generally been considered that if it is a security or a safety piece, then that doesn't apply.
Okay.
So for instance, I'm not going to, if somebody says delete all my data and they quit my company 3 weeks ago, I'm not going to go through and remove all of the times they access the system. Right, we have an investigation problem with that.
Right.
So it would be the same with criminal justice and things like that, where there are certain reasons why data does have to remain and stay. It's really targeted at going to be the consumer who's just like, you know what, I don't want to deal with this retail agency anymore. I want them to forget my data completely.
Okay. All right. Totally unrelated. On the penetration testing side, when you have a CRM Dynamics application that's highly customized, on the customization side, do you recommend any certain tools that work best, or has anybody found any tools that worked really well with looking at those customizations, web resources, things like that?
So given that the framework that CRM/Dynamics 365 provides, there's a lot of different various forms of web apps there. And I think without plugging specific tools, I can certainly plug the industry standard of OWASP. So there's an open standards body for the web-based penetration faults that have been found across the various different services online. And there are specific sets of testing and specific faults and frailties that can be observed and tested against. I highly recommend anybody that is performing customizations with the Dynamics 365 or any other web application, you take a look at OWASP. That's going to be your best bet at having some of the low-hanging fruit addressed to make sure you're standing up for best practices.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Part of the dialogue here?
I got 2 unrelated ones as well. We're going live with Dynamics 365, just the CRM piece, in December. So we've only really started playing with it and looking at it and all of that. Last Thursday, I flipped on auditing, but it appears to me, and it may be a time delay thing, that that's not in the security and compliance unified logging. Is that correct? Is there a separate area for Dynamics 365, or was it just a timing thing?
With respect to the product, there are a number of different features to subscribe to an audit feed. I don't believe necessarily they're in the compliance space.
Okay.
But you will want to, let's take a follow-up item on that one so that we can make sure that you've got the right folks from support to be able to talk through those various different knobs on that.
Nope.
Because I think there may be other contextual-based things instead of just is the logging working or is it not? We want to make sure we address that holistically.
Nope, that sounds good.
If you hang afterwards, I've actually got somebody I can
Okay,
connect
perfect.
you to
Thank
who
you.
can help answer
Appreciate it.
that.
The other one, when you're talking about incidents and you guys are watching everything and all of that. My assumption is if I have an end user with a compromised password who's suddenly logging in from all over the world, that's not an incident that raises to the level that you guys do anything about.
So that's something that we may not do internally within our own infrastructure, but that is something that we make sure that we empower you as the customer to be able to provide peace of mind to. So on this stage yesterday, I was in the room sitting where you are now, and we announced the availability of Azure's advanced threat protection. And so that couples with Azure Active Directory as a feature preview to be able to take a look at the Azure Active Directory accounts that you have and start doing normalization monitoring. So that means there's a time period in which the activities that are performed on your various different Microsoft services are observed for normality. So suddenly, if that particular user has never logged in from Norway or somewhere else before, and now they're accessing resources that they've never ever accessed, boop, a little alert will pop up, say there's some suspicious behavior that may be something for you to look into. So in answer to your question, while we may not necessarily be looking, again, with full respect to your privacy, while we may not be looking at every single thing that your particular users are doing, we aim to be able to provide you with the tools to be able to self-service those and have some of the most advanced means to do it. So that whether it's the Windows Defender detecting something at the host side, to the email that Office 365 provides to you, or the actual back-end services that are provided on Azure's side, allows for that level of seamless threading between all of them.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
Earlier there was a question about adding additional apps to Dynamics and where the liability stood. I read a blog post the other week which talked about app source and the lack of integrity from Microsoft on putting what goes onto the app source. So is that buyer beware? How do we ensure we're safe with app source apps?
So there is we actually have a gentleman here who, and I can introduce him to you at another point of the conference, who is very involved with app sourcing and go through what they do. But I do know that there is a whole back-end code check process of anything that's uploaded into app source. So where, from a compliance perspective, I'm not going to stand up here and say we've tested, approved, put controls over the top of it. There are things in place and security protocols going on for anything that's loaded into app source to make sure that something's not being uploaded that's, say, malicious. We do have, there is a level of customer responsibility to know what they're tossing on top of their service, but there are checks and balances put in place for it.
Correct. There's definitely a quality control for security aspects of the application. That doesn't necessarily mean that the application, by its very design, may not, push outside of the boundaries of your particular compliance scope. And so that's what we mean by making sure that folks are really aware of the apps that they're installing, so that it's not a question necessarily of the security and integrity that it poses to your infrastructure or to your customer data, but the various different things that that particular app is going to perform on your behalf. You should be informed and educated about what that impact is going to have. So yes, we do have quality control over the apps that do go in there. It isn't just free reign Wild West that folks can just submit whatever they want, but it is a shared responsibility to make sure that when you're extending and enhancing, that you take the time to understand how those specific things impact your particular install. Anyone else? We've got some more time to spend with you today.
About 15 minutes left on the clock, and I'll be honest, they don't let us out of the building very often. So they don't like to see us in the building generally, so they don't let us out into public very often. They just shove pizza under the door occasionally. But no, we do know that it is, the security part's a little bit more interesting, but the auditing and compliance piece, I'm well aware, it is a dry topic. I applaud you guys for coming out this morning and actually listening to it at 9 o'clock in the morning. I think you're probably highly caffeinated being here. But what we do is important. We are here to make sure that we are putting things in front of you that gain your trust and make you feel comfortable using the cloud service. Typically, this is the topic that comes up at the end of the sales deal, right? You've got somebody going from maybe on-prem to online. The business part makes sense, and then we get down to the CTO, the CEO, the lawyer, something along those lines, and they say, wait, how do we know that they're doing all of the right things in the system? And so that's where this conversation really takes place, and hopefully earlier than the very end of making that purchasing decision. But the idea being that we are doing these things on your behalf to keep the system safer and to gain your trust within the system.
Do you have the clicker? Here we go.
Okay.
So if there are no other questions, I'll put the last slide up to remind you to please make sure you evaluate our session. And there's also additional resources here. So the Microsoft Trust Center that we talked about earlier today that allows you to be able to see exactly what the contents of the reports look like, from compliance certifications to control findings to actual penetration tests. Those are available to you as customers. We've also included the links to the Unified Cloud Pen Testing Policy as well, so that if you need additional peace of mind or you need to schedule a pen test of your specific portal or service, those are the details there that I mentioned earlier that you can go into, along with additional authentication, IP filtering, or just the security model white papers as well. So we wanted to make sure that we empowered you with some additional information that you could go off and see, and it wasn't something that we just spoke about only in the bullet points on the slide.
Our deck is available. If you go to the app and you go to the slides, you can pull down the deck. We've made all of our slides available. We haven't hidden any of them, so feel free to pull down the deck. I think the very last one is about the reviews. We do appreciate your feedback and review. If we do ask them to let us out of our cave occasionally, we do need your feedback. But in all honesty, both constructive feedback is welcome. We want to make sure we're getting you the information that you need and that we're providing to you. So if there is anything that you didn't see here that you wanted from a security and compliance standpoint, we can't go too deep into the apps or things like that. That's just not our wheelhouse. But we're welcome to feedback, good, bad.
So thank you.
Hopefully not indifferent.
So thank you very much for your time. We'd love to make sure we keep up the dialogue and that it's not a one-way conversation for security, compliance, and transparency. And so thank you very much for spending the morning with us.